there, everyone. It's Chapter 5 of Stardust, in which there is much fighting for the crown. In the morning's bright light, the young lady seemed more human and less ethereal. She'd said nothing since Tristan had awoken. Wrong lamp. He took his knife and cut a fallen tree branch into a Y-shaped crutch while she sat beneath a sycamore tree and glared at him and glowered at him and scowled at him from her place on the ground. He peeled the bark from a green branch and wound it around the upper fork of the Y. They had no breakfast yet, and Tristan was ravenous. His stomach rumbled as he worked. The star said nothing about being hungry. Then again, she had done nothing at all but look at him, at first reproachfully, and then with undisguised hatred. He pulled the bark tight, then looped it under itself, and tugged at it once more. "This is honestly nothing personal," he said to the woman and to the grove. With the full sunlight shining down, she scarcely glittered at all, save for where the darkest shadows touched her. The star ran one pale forefinger up and down the silver chain that went between them, tracing the line of it about her slim wrist, and made no reply. "I did it for love," he continued, "and you really are my only hope. Her name, that is, the name of my love, is Victoria Forrester, and she is the prettiest, wisest, sweetest girl in the whole world." The girl broke her silence with a snort of derision. "And this wise, sweet creature sent you here to torture me," she said. "Well, not exactly. You see, she promised me anything I desired, be it her hand in marriage or her lips to kiss, were I to bring her the star that we saw fall the night before last. I'd thought," he confessed, "that a fallen star would probably look like a diamond or a rock. I certainly wasn't expecting a lady." "So having found a lady, could you not have come to her aid, nor left her alone? Why drag her into your foolishness?" "Love," he explained. She looked at him with the eyes of blue sky. "I hope you choke on it," she said flatly. I won't," said Tristan, with more confidence and good cheer than he actually felt. "Here, try this." He passed her the crutch and, reaching down, tried to help her to her feet. His hands tingled not unpleasantly where his skin touched hers. She sat on the ground like a tree stump, making no effort to get up. "I told you," she said, "that I would do everything in my power to frustrate your plans and devices." She looked around the grove. How very bland this world does look by day, and how dull. "Just put your weight on me and the rest on the crutch," he said. "You'll have to move sometime." He tugged on the chain, and reluctantly, the star began to get to her feet, leaning first against Tristan, and then, as if proximity to him disgusted her, on the crutch. She gasped then in the hard intake of breath and tumbled onto the grass, where she lay with her face contorted, making small noises of pain. Tristan knelt down beside her. "What's wrong?" he asked. Her blue eyes flashed, but they were swimming with tears. "My leg, I can't stand on it. It must really be broken." Her skin had gone white as a cloud, and she was shivering. "I'm sorry," said Tristan uselessly. "I can make you a splint. I've done it for sheep. It'll be all right." He squeezed her hand, and he went to the brook and dipped his handkerchief in it and gave it to the star to wipe on her forehead. He split more fallen wood with his knife. Then he removed his jerkin, took off his shirt, which he proceeded to tear into strips, which he used to bind the sticks as firmly as he could around the injured leg. The star made no sounds while he did this, although when he pulled the last knot tight, he thought he heard her whimper to herself. "Really," he told her, "you ought to get a proper doctor. I'm not a surgeon or anything." "No, you astonish me." He let her rest for a little in the sun, and then he said, "Well, better try again, I suppose," and he raised her to her feet. They left the glade at a hobble, the star leaning heavily on her crutch and on Tristan's arm, wincing at every step. And every time she winced or flinched, Tristan felt guilty and awkward, but he calmed himself thinking of Victoria Forrester's grey eyes. They followed a deer path through the hazelwood, while Tristan, who had decided that the right thing to do was make conversation with the star, asked how long she had been a star, whether it was enjoyable to be a star, and whether all stars were women, and informed her that he had always supposed stars to be, as Miss Cherry had taught them, flaming balls of burning gas many hundreds of miles across, just like the sun, only further away. To all of these questions and statements she made no answer. "So why did you fall?" he asked. Did you trip over something? She stopped moving and turned and stared at him, as if she were examining something quite unpleasant a very long way away. I did not trip, she said at length. I was hit by this. She reached into her dress and pulled out a large yellowish stone which dangled from two lengths of silver chain. There's a bruise on my side where it hit me and knocked me from the sky, and now I am obligated to take it with me. Why? She seemed as if she were about to answer, and then she shook her head, her lips closed, and said nothing at all. A stream rilled and splashed to their right, keeping pace with them. The noonday sun was overhead, and Tristan found himself getting increasingly hungry. He took the heel of the dry loaf from his bag, moistened it in the stream, and shared it out half and half. The star inspected the wet bread with disdain and did not put it in her mouth. Well, you'll starve, warned Tristan. She said nothing, just raised her chin a little higher. They continued through the woodland, making slow progress. They were laboring up a deer path on the side of a hill which led them over fallen trees, and which had now become so steep it threatened to tumble the stumbling star and her captor down to the bottom. Is there not an easier path? Asked the star at length. Some kind of road or a level clearing? And once the question was asked, Tristan knew the answer. There is a road about half a mile that way, he told her, pointing, and a clearing over there beyond that thicket, he said, turning to motion in the other direction. You knew that? Yes. No. Well, I only knew it once you asked me. Well, let's make for the clearing, she said, and they pushed through the thicket as best they could. It still took them the better part of an hour to reach the clearing, but the ground, when they got there, was level and flat as a playing field. The space seemed to have been cleared with a purpose, but what that purpose was, Tristan could not imagine. In the center of the glade, on the grass, some distance from them, was an ornate golden crown which glittered in the afternoon sunlight. It was studded with red and blue stones. Rubies and sapphires, thought Tristan. He was about to walk over to the crown when the star touched his arm and said, Wait, do you hear drums? He realized that he did, a low throbbing beat coming from all about them, near at hand and far away, which echoed through the hills. And then there came a loud crashing noise from the trees at the far side of the clearing, and a high, wordless screaming. Into the glade came a huge white horse, its flanks gashed and bloody. It charged down into the middle of the clearing, and then it turned, lowering its head, and faced its pursuer, which bounded into the clearing with a growl that made Tristan's flesh prickle. It was a lion, but it looked little enough like the lion Tristan had seen at the fair in the next village, which had been mangy, toothless, roomy thing. This lion was huge, the color of sand in late afternoon. It entered the clearing at a run, and when it stopped, it snarled at the white horse. The horse looked terrified. Its mane was matted with sweat and blood, and its eyes were wild. Also, Tristan realized it had a long ivory horn jutting from the center of its forehead. It reared up on its hind legs, whinnying and snorting, and one sharp, unshod hoof connected with the lion's shoulder, causing the lion to howl like a huge, scalded cat and to spring backwards. Then, keeping its distance, the lion circled the wary unicorn, its golden eyes at all times fixed upon the sharp horn that was always turned towards it. Stop them, whispered the star. They'll kill each other. The lion growled at the unicorn. It began as a soft growl like distant thunder and finished as the roar that shook the trees and rocks of the valley in the sky. Then the lion sprang and the unicorn plunged. The glade was filled with gold and silver and red, for the lion was on the unicorn's back, claws gashing deeply into its flanks, its mouth at its neck, and the unicorn was wailing and bucking and throwing itself onto its back in an effort to dislodge the great cat, flailing uselessly with its hooves, its horn, in an effort to reach its tormentor. Please do something! The lion will kill him! Pleaded the girl urgently. Tristan would have explained to her that all he could possibly hope for if he approached the raging beasts was to be skewered, kicked, clawed, and eaten, and he would further have explained that, should he somehow survive approaching them, there was still nothing he could do, having nothing with him, not even a pail of water, which had been the traditional method of breaking up animal fights in wall. But by the time all of these thoughts had gone through his head, Tristan was already standing in the center of the clearing, an arm's length from the beasts. The scent of the lion was deep, animal, and terrifying, and Tristan was close enough to see the beseeching expression in the unicorn's black eyes. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown, thought Tristan to himself, remembering the old nursery rhyme. The lion beat the unicorn all about the town. He beat him once, he beat him twice, with all his might and main. He beat him 3 times over, his power to maintain. And with that he picked up the crown from the grass. It was heavy and soft as lead. He walked towards the animals, talking to the lion as he had talked to the ill-tempered rams and agitated ewes at his father's field, saying, "Here now, easy. Here's your crown." The lion shook the unicorn into its jaws like a cat worrying a woolen scarf, and darted a look of pure puzzlement at Tristan. "Hello," said Tristan. There were burrs and leaves in the lion's mane. He held the heavy crown out towards the great beast. "You won. You won. Let the unicorn go."
I always put the camera in the wrong spot because I'm
not good at mirrors. You won. Let the unicorn go. "What's in your mouth? Let it go. Put it down." And he took a step closer. Then he reached out both trembling hands and placed the crown on the lion's head. The lion clambered off the prone body of the unicorn and began to pad silently about the clearing, its head raised high. It reached the edge of the wood, where it paused for several minutes to lick its wounds with its red tongue, and then, purring like an earthquake, the lion slipped away into the forest. The star hobbled over to the injured unicorn and lowered herself onto the grass, awkwardly, her broken legs splayed out by her side. She stroked its head. "Oh, poor creature," she said. It opened its dark eyes and stared at her, and then it laid its head upon her lap, and it closed its eyes once more. That evening, Tristan ate the last of the hard bread for his supper, and the star ate nothing at all. She had insisted that they wait beside the unicorn, and Tristan had not the heart to refuse her. The clearing was dark now. The sky above them was filled with the twinkling of 1,000 stars. The Star Woman glittered too, as if she had been brushed by the Milky Way, while the unicorn glowed gently in the darkness, like a moon seen through the clouds. Tristan lay beside the huge bulk of the unicorn, feeling its warmth radiating out into the night. The star was laying on the other side of the beast. It sounded almost as if she were murmuring a song to the unicorn. Tristan wished that he could hear her properly. The fragments of melody he could make out were strange and tantalizing, but she sang so quietly that he could hear next to nothing at all. His fingers touched the chain that bound them. Cold as snow it was, and tenuous as moonlight on a mill pond, or the hint of the glint of light on a trout's silver scales as it rises at dusk to feed. And soon he slept. Beverage brought to you by Plastic Cup. The Witch Queen drove her chariot down a forest path, lashing the flanks of the twin white billy goats with a whip when they flagged. She had observed the small cooking fire burning beside the path for almost half a mile back, and she knew from the color of the flames that it was the fire of one of her people, for witch fires burn with certain unnatural hues. So she reined in her goats when she reached the brightly painted gypsy caravan, and the cooking fire, and the iron-haired old woman who sat beside the fire, tending to the spit over the flames on which a hare was roasting. Fat dripped from the hare's open gut, hissing and sizzling in the fire, which gave off the twin aromas of cooking meat and wood smoke. A multicolored bird sat by the driver's seat at the front of the caravan on a wooden perch. It raised its feathers and called out in alarm when it saw the Witch Queen, but it was chained to its perch and could not leave. "Before you says anything," said the gray-haired woman, "I should tell you that I'm just a poor old flower seller, a harmless old biddy who's never done nothing to no one, and the sight of a grand terrifying lady such as yourself fills me with dread and fear." "I'll not harm you," said the Witch Queen. The hare unscrewed her eyes to slits and looked the lady in the red kirtle up and down. "That's what she says," she said, "but how am I to know that it's so? A sweet old lady like me, who's all a tremble from her toes to her water, you might be planning to rob me in the night, or worse." And she poked the fire with a stick, so it leapt up, and the smell of cooked meat hung in the still evening air. "I swear," said the lady in the scarlet kirtle, "that, by the rules and constraints of the sisterhood, to which you and I belong, by the puissance of Lilim, and by my lips and maidenhood, that I mean you no harm, and shall treat you as if you were my own guest." "Oh, that's good enough for me, dearie ducks," said the old woman, her face breaking into a smile. "Come and sit down. Supper will be cooked in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail." "With good will," said the lady in the red kirtle. The goats snuffled and munched at the grass and the leaves beside the chariot, eyeing with distaste the tethered mules that pulled the caravan. "Fine goats," said the harridan. The witch queen inclined her head and smiled modestly. The firelight glinted on the little scarlet snake wrapped as a bracelet around her wrist. The harridan went on. "No, my dear, my old eyes aren't what they once were by any means, but would I be correct in supposing that one of those fine fellows started life walking on 2 legs and not 4? "Such things have been heard of," admitted the witch queen. "That splendid bird of yours, for example." That bird gave away one of the prizes of my stock items for sale, gave it away to a good-for-nothing nearly 20 years ago, and afterward the trouble she put me through scarcely bears considering, so these days she stays a bird unless there's work that needs doing, or the flower stall to run, and if I could find a good strong servant not afraid of a little hard work, why then she could stay a bird forever. Kids these days, nobody wants to work for a witch." The bird chirped sadly on its perch. "They call me Mistress Simile," said Harridan. "They called you Ditchwater Sal when you were a young chit of a thing," thought the witch queen, but she did not say this aloud. "You may call me Morwaneg," said the witch instead, which it was, she reflected, almost a joke, for Morwaneg means wave of the sea, and her true name was long since drowned and lost beneath the cold ocean. Mistress Semele got to her feet and made her way into the interior of the caravan, emerging with 2 painted wooden bowls, 2 wooden-handled knives, and a small pot of herbs dried and flaked to a green powder. "I was going to be eaten with my fingers on a plate of fresh leaves," she said, handing the bowl to the lady with in the scarlet kirtle. The bowl had sunflower painted on it under a layer of dust. "But I thought, well, how often does I get such fine company? So nothing but the best. Heads or tails?" "Let it be your choice," said her guest. "Heads to you, with the luscious eyes and brains, and the crispy, crunchy ears of him, and I'll have the rump with nothing but dull meat to nibble." She lifted the spit off the fire, and, as she spoke, using 2 knives so fast they seemed more a glitter than of blades. More than a glitter of blades, or little more. Yeah. Using both knives so fast that they seemed little more than a glitter of blades, she parted the carcass and sliced the meat from the bones, and dealt it out fairly equitably onto each bowl. She passed the pot of herbs to her guest. "There's no salt, my dear, but if you shake this on, it'll do the trick. A little basil, a little mountain thyme, mine own receipt." The witch queen took her portion of roasted hare and one of the knives and sprinkled a little of the herbs onto the dish. She speared a bite on the point of the knife and ate it with relish, while her hostess toyed with her own portion, then blew on it fastidiously, steam coming from the crisp brown meat. "How is it?" asked the old woman. "Perfectly palatable," said her guest honestly. "It's the herbs what make it so fine," explained the harridan. "I can taste the basil and the thyme," said the guest, "but there is another taste I find harder to place." "Ah," said Madame Semele, and she nibbled a sliver of meat. "It is certainly a most uncommon taste." "That it is. It's an herb that grows only in Garamond, on the island in the midst of a wide lake. It is most pleasant with all manner of meats and fishes, and it reminds me in flavor, a little of the leaves of fennel, but with a hint of nutmeg. The flowers are a most attractive shade of orange. It is good for wind and ague, and it is, in addition, a gentle soporific, which has the curious property of causing one who tastes of it to speak nothing but the truth for several hours." The lady in the scarlet kirtle dropped her wooden bowl onto the ground. "Limbus grass," she said. "You dare to feed me limbus grass?" "Oh, that's how it would seem, dearie," said the old woman, cackled and hooted with delight. "So tell me now, Mistress Morwaneg, if that is your name, where you're going off in your fine chariot, and why do you remind me so of someone I knew once? And Madame Semele never forgets nothing and no one." "I'm on my way to find a star," said the witch queen, "which fell in the great woods on the other side of Mount Belly, And when I find her, I shall take my great knife and cut out her heart while she yet lives, and while her heart is her own. For the heart of a living star is a sovereign remedy against all the snares of age and time. My sisters wait for me to return. Madame Semele hooted and hugged herself, swaying back and forth, bony fingers clutching at her sides. Ah, the heart of a star, is it? Hee! Oh, such a fine prize it will make for me. I shall taste enough of it that my youth will come back, and my hair will turn from grey to golden, and my dugs swell and soften and become firm and high. Then I shall take all the heart that's left to great market of all. Hee! You shall not do this thing, said her guest very quietly. No, you are a guest, my dear. You swore your oath. You tasted my food. According to the laws of our sisterhood, there is nothing you can do to harm me. Oh, there are so many things I could do to harm you, Ditchwater Sal, but I shall simply point out that one who has eaten limbus grass can speak nothing but the truth for several hours afterwards. And one more thing. Distant lightning flickered in her words as she spoke, and the forest was hushed, as if every leaf and every tree was listening intently to what she said. This I say, you have stolen knowledge that you did not earn, but it shall not profit you, for you shall be unable to see the star, unable to perceive it, unable to touch it, taste it, find it, or kill it. Even if another were to cut out its heart and give it to you, you would not know it, never know what you had in your hand. This I say, these are my words, and they are true speaking. And know this also, I swore by the compact of the sisterhood that I would do you no harm. Had I not so sworn, I would change you into a black beetle, and I would pull your legs off one by one, and leave you for the birds to find for putting me to this indignity. Madame Semele's eyes opened wide with fright, and she stared over the flames of the fire with her guest. Who are you? She said. When you knew me last, said the woman in the scarlet kirtle. I ruled with my sisters in Carnadine before it was lost. But you're dead, long dead. They have said that the Lilum were dead before now, but they have always lied. The squirrel has not yet found the acorn that will grow into the oak tree, that will be cut to form the cradle the babe will grow to slay me. Silver flashes glittered and flared in the flames as she spoke. So it is you, and you have your youth back, Madame Semele sighed, and now I too shall be young again. The lady in the scarlet kirtle stood up, and then placed the bowl which had contained her portion of the hair into the fire. You shall do nothing of the kind, she said. Did you not hear me? A moment after I leave, you shall forget that ever you saw me. You shall forget all of this, even my curse, although the knowledge of it shall vex and irritate you, like an itch in a limb long since amputated. And may you treat your guests with more grace and respect in the future. The wooden bowl burst into flames then, a huge gout of flame which singed the leaves of the oak tree far above them. Madame Semele knocked the blackened bowl from the fire with a stick and stamped it out in the long grass. Whatever could have possessed me to drop my bowl into a fire? She exclaimed aloud. And look, one of my nice knives all burned up and ruined. Oh, whatever was I thinking? There came no answer. From further down the road came the drumming beats of something that might have been the hooves of goats, racing on into the night. Madame Semele shook her head as if to clear it of dust and cobwebs. I'm getting old, she said to the multicolored bird who sat on his perch by the driver's seat, who had observed everything and forgotten nothing. Getting old, and there's nothing about it. The bird shifted uncomfortably on the perch. A red squirrel quested, hesitating a little into the firelight. It picked up an acorn, held it for a moment in its hand-like front paws, as if it were praying. Then it ran away to bury the acorn and to forget it. Scythes Ebb is a small seaport town built on granite, a town of chandlers and carpenters and sailmakers, of old sailors with missing fingers and limbs who have opened their own grog houses or spend their days in them, what is left of their hair still tarred in long queues through though the stubble on their chins has long since dusted to white. There are no whores in Scythes Ebb, or none that consider themselves as such, although there have always been many women who, if pressed, would describe themselves as much married, with one husband on this ship here every 6 months, and another husband on that ship back in port for a month or so every 9. The mathematics of the thing have always kept most folks satisfied, and if it ever disappoints and a man returns to his wife while one of her other husbands is still in occupancy, why, Then there is a fight, and the grog shops to comfort the loser. The sailors do not mind the arrangement, for they know that this way there will, at the very least, be one person who, at the last, will notice when they do not come back from the sea, and will mourn their loss. And their wives content themselves with the certain knowledge that their husbands are also unfaithful, for there is no competing with the sea in a man's affections, since she is both mother and mistress, and she will wash his corpse also, in time to come, wash it to coral and ivory and pearls. So it was to Scythe's ebb that Lord Primus of Stormhold came one night, all dressed in black, with a beard as thick and serious as one of the stork's nest in the town's chimneys. He came in a carriage drawn by 4 black horses, and he took a room in the Seaman's Rest on the Crook Street. He was considered most peculiar in his needs and requests, for he brought his own food and drink into his rooms and kept it locked in a wooden chest, which he would only open to take himself an apple or a wedge of cheese or a cup of pepper wine. His was the topmost room of the Seaman's Rest, a high and spindly building built on rocky outcrop and to facilitate smuggling. He bribed a number of local street urchins to report to him the moment they saw any fellow that they did not know come to town by land or by sea. In particular, they were to look for a very tall, very angular, dark-haired fellow with a thin and hungry face and blank eyes. "Primus is certainly learning caution," said Secundus to his 4 dead brothers. "Well, you know what they say," whispered Quintus in his wistful tones of the dead, which sounded, on that day, like the lapping of distant waves upon the shingle. "A man who is tired of looking over his shoulder for Septimus is tired of his life." In the mornings, Primus would talk to the sea captains with ships in Scythe's ebb, buying them grog liberally, but neither drinking nor eating with them. In the afternoon he would inspect the ships on the docks. Soon the gossips of Scythe's ebb, and there were many, had the gist and juice of all. The bearded gentleman was to be taking a ship to the east, and this tale was soon chased by another, that he would be sailing out on the Heart of Dream under Captain Jan, a black-trimmed ship with its deck painted crimson red, of more or less savory reputation, by which I mean that it was generally held that she kept her piracies for more distant waters. And this would be happening as soon as he gave the word. "Good master," said the street urchin to Lord Primus, "there's a man in town, come by land. He lodges with Mistress Petier. Mistress Petier. He is thin and crow-like, and I saw him in the ocean's roar buying grog for every man in the room. He says he is a distressed seafaring man seeking a berth." Primus patted the boy's filthy head and handed him a coin, and then he returned to his preparations, and that afternoon it was announced that the Heart of a Dream would leave harbour in 3 short days. The day before the Heart of a Dream was set to sail, Primus was seen to sell his coach and 4 horses to the stableman on Wardle Street, after which he walked down to the quay, dispensing small coins to the urchins. He entered his cabin in the Heart of a Dream and gave strict orders that none were to disturb him for any reason, good or bad, until they were at least a week out of port. That evening an unfortunate accident befell an able seaman who had crewed the rigging on the Heart of a Dream. He fell when drunk on the slippery cobblestones of Revenue Street and broke his hip. Luckily, there was a replacement at ready, the very sailor with whom he had been drinking that evening, and whom the injured man had been persuaded to demonstrate a particularly complicated hornpipe step on the wet cobbles. And this sailor, tall, dark, and crow-like, marked his ship's papers with a circle that night, and was on deck at dawn when the ship sailed out of the harbour in the morning mist. Heart of a Dream sailed east. Lord Primus of Stormhold, his beard freshly shaven, watched it sail from the cliff top until it was lost to view. Then he walked down to Wardle Street, where he returned the stableman's money and something more besides, and he rode off to the coast road, or on the coast road towards the west, in a dark coach pulled by 4 black horses. It was an obvious solution. After all, the unicorn had been ambling hugely behind them for most of the morning, occasionally nudging the star's shoulder with its big forehead. The wounds on its dappled flanks, which had blossomed like red flowers under the lion's claws the day before, were now dried to brown and scabbed over. The star limped and hobbled and stumbled, and Tristan walked beside her, with a cold chain binding wrist to wrist. On the one hand, Tristan felt that there was something almost sacrilegious about the idea of riding the unicorn. It was not a horse, it did not subscribe to any of the ancient pacts between man and horse, There was a wildness in its black eyes and a twisting spring to its step which was dangerous and untamed. On the other hand, Tristan had begun to feel, in a way that he could not articulate, that the unicorn cared about the star and wished to help her. So he said, "Look, I know all this stuff about frustrating my plans every step of the way, but if the unicorn is willing, and perhaps it could carry you on its back for a little way." The star said nothing. "Well?" She shrugged. Tristan turned to the unicorn, stared into its pool black eyes. "Can you understand me?" he asked. It said nothing. He'd hoped it would nod its head or stamp a hoof like a trained horse that he had once seen on the village green when he was younger, but it simply stared. Will you carry the lady?" "Please?" The beast said not a word, nor did it nod nor stamp, but it walked to the star and it knelt down at her feet. Tristan helped the star onto the unicorn's back. She grasped its tangled mane with both hands and sat side saddle upon it, her broken legs sticking out, and that was how they traveled for some hours. Tristan walked along beside them, carrying her crutch over his shoulder, with his bag dangling on the end. He found it as hard to travel with the star riding the unicorn as it had been before. Then he had been forced to walk slowly, trying to keep pace with the star's limping hobble. Now he was hurrying to keep up with the unicorn, nervous lest the unicorn should get too far ahead, and the chain that linked them both should pull the star from the beast's back. His stomach rumbled as he walked. He was painfully aware of how hungry he was. Soon Tristan began to think of himself as nothing more than hunger, thinly surrounded by flesh, and, as far as he could, walking. He stumbled and knew that he was going to fall. "Please, stop," he gasped. The unicorn slowed and stopped. The star looked down at him. Then she made a face and shook her head. "You'd better come up here too," she said, "if the unicorn will let you. Otherwise you'll just faint or something and drag me onto the ground with you, and we need to go somewhere so that you can get food." Tristan nodded gratefully. The unicorn appeared to offer no opposition, waiting passively, so Tristan attempted to clamber up onto it. It was like climbing a sheer wall, and as fruitless. Eventually, Tristan led the animal over to a beech tree that had been uprooted several years before by a storm or a high wind or an irritable giant, and, holding his bag and the star's crutch, he scrambled onto the roots of the trunk, and from there onto the back of the unicorn. "There's a village on the other side of that hill," said Tristan. "I expect that we can find something to eat when we get there." He patted the unicorn's flanks with his free hand. The beast began to walk. Tristan moved his hand to the star's waist to steady himself. He could feel the silken texture of her thin dress, and beneath that the thick chain of the topaz around her waist. Riding a unicorn was not like riding a horse. It did not move like a horse. It was a wilder ride and a stranger one. The unicorn waited until Tristan and the star were comfortable upon its back, and then, slowly and easily, it began to put on speed. The trees surged and leapt past them. The star leaned forward, her fingers tangled in the unicorn's mane. Tristan, his hunger forgotten in his fear, gripped the sides of the unicorn with his knees and simply prayed that he would not be knocked to the ground by a stray branch. Soon he found he was beginning to enjoy the experience. There is something about riding a unicorn for those people who still can, which is unlike any other experience, exhilarating and intoxicating and fine. The sun was setting when they reached the outskirts of the village. In a rolling meadow, beneath an oak tree, the unicorn came to a skittish halt, and would go no further. Tristan dismounted and landed with a bump on the grass of the meadow. His rump felt sore, but, with the star looking down at him uncomplaining, he dared not rub it. "Are you hungry?" He asked the star. She said nothing. "Look, I'm starving, perfectly famished. I don't know if stars eat or what they eat, but I won't have you starving yourself." He looked up at her, questioning. She stared down at him, first impassively, then, in a trice, her blue eyes filled with tears. She raised a hand to her face and wiped away tears, leaving a smudge of mud on her cheeks. "We eat only darkness, and we drink only light. I'm not hungry. I'm lonely, and I'm scared and cold and miserable. I can't capture, but I'm not hungry." Oh, don't cry, said Tristan. Look, I'll go into the village and get some food. You just wait here. The unicorn will protect you if anyone comes. He reached up and gently lifted her down from the unicorn's back. The unicorn shook its mane and began to crop the grass of the meadow contentedly. The star sniffed. Wait here? She asked, holding up the chain that joined them. Oh, said Tristan, give me your hand. She reached out her hand to him. He fumbled with the chain to undo it, but it would not undo. Said Tristan. He tugged at the chain around his own wrist, but it too held fast. It looks, he said, as if I'm tied to you as you are to me. The star threw her hair back, closed her eyes, and sighed deeply, and then, opening her eyes, once again self-possessed, and said, Perhaps there's a magic word or something. I don't know any magic words, said Tristan. He held the chain up. It glittered red and purple in the light of the setting sun. Please? He said. There was a ripple in the fabric of the chain, and he slid his hand out of it. Oh, there you go, he said, passing the star at the other end of the chain that bound her. I'll try not to be too long, and if any of the fair folk sing their silly songs to you, for heaven's sake, don't throw your crutch at them, they'll only steal it. I won't, she said. I'll have to trust you, on your honor as a star, not to run away. She touched her splinted leg. I'll do no running for quite some time, she said pointedly, and with that Tristan had to content himself. He walked the last half mile into the village, but it had no inn, being so far off the beaten track for travelers. But the portly old woman who explained this to him then insisted he accompany her to her cottage, where she pressed upon him a wooden bowl full of barley porridge with carrots in it, and a mug of small beer. He exchanged his cambric handkerchief for a bottle of elderflower cordial, a round green cheese, and a number of unfamiliar fruits. They were soft and fuzzy like apricots, but they were purple blue of grapes, and they smelled a little like ripe pears. Also, the woman gave him a small bale of hay for the unicorn. He walked back to the meadow where he had left them, munching on a piece of fruit, which was juicy and chewy and quite sweet. He wondered if the star would like to try one, whether she would like it if she did. He hoped that she would be pleased with what he had brought her. At first Tristan thought that he must have made a mistake and that he had lost his way in the moonlight. No, that was the same oak tree, the one beneath which the star had been sitting. Hello? He called. Glowworms and fireflies glittered green and yellow in the hedgerows and in the branches of trees. There came no reply, and Tristan felt a sick, stupid feeling in the pit of his stomach. Hello? He called. He stopped calling then because there was no one to answer. He dropped the bale of hay, and then he kicked it. She was southwest of him, moving faster than he could walk. He followed after her in the bright moonlight. Inside, he felt numbed and foolish, stung by a pang of guilt and shame and regret. He could not have loosed her chain. He could not have tied it to a tree. Or he should not have loosed her chain. He should have tied it to a tree. He should have forced the star to go with him to the village. This went through his head as he walked, but another voice spoke to him also, pointing out that if he had not unchained her then, he would have done it sometime soon, and she would have run from him then. He wondered if he would ever see the star again, and he stumbled over roots as the way led him between old trees into the deep woods. The moonlight slowly vanished beneath the thick canopy of trees, and after stumbling vainly in the dark for a short while, he laid himself down beneath a tree and rested his head on his bag, and closed his eyes and felt sorry for himself until he was asleep. Let me just double check. Oh, okay. We're almost done with the chapter. On a rocky mountain pass on the southernmost slopes of Mount Belly, the Witch Queen reined in her goat-drawn chariot and stopped and sniffed the chilly air. The myriad stars hung cold in the sky above her. Her red lips curled into a smile of such beauty, such brilliance, such pure and perfect happiness that would have frozen your blood in your veins to have seen it. Oh, there. She's coming to me. And the wind of the mountain pass howled about her triumphantly as if in answer. Primus sat beside the embers of his fire, and he shivered beneath his thick black robe. One of the black stallions, waking or dreaming, whinnied and snorted, and then rested once more. Primus's face felt strangely cold. He missed his thick beard. With his stick, he pushed a clay ball from the embers. He spat on his hands and then split open the hot clay and smelled the sweet flesh of the hedgehog which had cooked slowly in the embers as he had slept. He ate his breakfast meticulously, spitting the tiny bones into the fire circle once he had chewed the meat from them. He washed the hedgehog down with a lump of hard cheese and a slightly vinegary white wine. Once he had eaten, he wiped his hands upon his robe, and then he cast the runes to find the topaz stone which conferred the lordship of the crag towns and the vast estates of Stormhold. He cast them, then he stared, puzzled at the small, square, red granite tiles. He picked them up once more, shook them in his long-fingered hands, and dropped them onto the ground and stared at them again. Then Primus spat onto the embers, which hissed lazily. He swept the tiles up and dropped them into the pouch at his belt. "It's moving faster, further," said Primus to himself. He pissed on the embers of the fire, for he was in wild country, and there were bandits and hobgoblins and worse in those lands, and he had no desire to alert them to his presence. Then he hitched the horses to the carriage and climbed into the driver's seat and drove them towards the forest to the west and to the mountain range beyond. The girl held tight to the unicorn's neck as it tumbled headlong through the dark forest. There was no moonlight between the trees, but the unicorn glimmered and shone with pale light like the moon, while the girl herself glittered and glowed as if it trailed a dust of lights. And as she passed through the trees, it might have appeared to a distant observer that she seemed to twinkle on and off like a tiny, tiny star. And we're actually... Oh. Looks like chapter 6 is actually fairly short. But we're about to come up on my favorite part when I was reading the story. Because it reminds me very much of my dearest friend, Rachel. Because she is self-assured and full of sass. Or, as the internet once said, a walking entity of sass. I love that phrase. So, anyway, what we have learned is cats are cats, and if you remind them that they're kings and queens, then they are much pleased of themselves. So, with that, we are coming up on the end of tonight's story. So, I hope that helps you sleep well. So, remember, get some rest and do your best. And try to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without reason, then I can love you for exactly the same. So, I hope you sleep well.